When Buckingham Palace summoned its senior royals for an emergency summit, whispers of betrayal and chaos erupted within the walls. But no one could predict the devastating secret about to be revealed, least of all, by the most stoic royal of them all, Princess Anne. It began before sunrise. A flurry of urgent calls shattered the stillness of the royal residences, rousing each family member from their uneasy slumber. The Queen's private secretary himself delivered the message in clipped, grave tones. His Majesty insists you all attend at once. Non-negotiable. By the time the morning sky turned pale and cold over London, black cars carrying William, Catherine, Harry, and Camilla were already gliding silently through the palace gates. Each arrived cloaked in the same sense of dread, though none spoke of it aloud. In their eyes flickered suspicion, worry, and something darker ambition. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was thick and suffocating. Footsteps echoed down the grand corridors as aides scurried to prepare the meeting room, careful to avoid the gaze of the royals now gathering in awkward silence. William stood tall, but tense, his jaw locked tight, as Catherine held his arm just a little too firmly. Harry lingered at the edge, a shadow of his former self, visibly unsettled by the company he now kept. And Camilla arrived with her usual air of self-assurance, though her darting eyes betrayed an unease that even she struggled to hide. Minutes ticked by, and then finally she appeared. Princess Anne entered last, her heels striking against the polished floor in deliberate rhythm. She didn't glance at anyone as she crossed the room. Clutched tightly in her hand was a sealed folder, the kind of detail no one dared comment on, yet everyone noticed. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, met Charles's for a fleeting second before she took her seat without a word. In that brief exchange, something shifted, an unspoken warning, passing like a shadow over the table. Meanwhile, beyond those ancient stone walls, the media gathered like vultures, their lenses poised, their questions already rehearsed. Reporters sensed something unusual, but could only speculate as to what had summoned the monarchy's most guarded members so urgently. Some whispered about health scares, others spoke of abdication. But no one dared imagine the truth that was about to tear through the monarchy like a storm. In the hushed corridors beyond the meeting room, palace staff exchanged nervous glances and hurried whispers. Some murmured of an internal coup, while others called it a dangerous plot. Servants who had served the crown for decades confessed they had never seen such fear in the royal family's faces, not even during Diana's darkest days. As Anne finally set the folder before her and folded her hands to stop it, an eerie silence swallowed the room. It wasn't just anticipation, it was foreboding. And yet, despite the palpable tension, no one dared speak first. Everyone waited for someone else to break the spell, but Anne's eyes stayed fixed ahead, unmoving, like a soldier preparing for war. But no one sitting around that grand oak table suspected the weight of the revelations Princess Anne was about to unleash, or the target she'd set her sights on. As the royals exchanged icy pleasantries, Princess Anne's voice cut through like a blade. Enough! Her next words sent the room into stunned silence, and Camilla into a visible panic. The sound of her command hung heavy in the air, freezing the hushed murmurs and shallow laughter that had been keeping the tension at bay. Even King Charles, who had been staring down at the table as though willing the ordeal to end before it began, jerked his head up, his mouth falling slightly open. Anne, the one they all considered the steadiest, the most reserved, had chosen to speak first, and there was no mistaking the fury in her tone. Slowly, deliberately, she rose from her chair. Her fingers no longer rested on the sealed folder. Instead, they clenched the table's edge as she leaned forward, her eyes locked on Camilla. "You've made a mockery of this family," she began, her words sharp and deliberate, cutting into the silence like knives. Camilla shifted in her chair, her face caught between defiance and fear, as the rest of the family turned their gazes on her. Anne didn't give her a moment to respond. With unflinching resolve, she announced what no one dared say aloud, that Camilla had been holding clandestine meetings with senior palace aides, meetings kept hidden even from the king himself. Meetings that, Anne alleged, had one purpose: to strip William and Catherine of their rightful influence within the family and the institution. Gasps broke out at the table. William's fist clenched, his knuckles whitening against the polished wood, while Catherine's eyes glistened in disbelief. Even Harry, who had distanced himself from palace intrigues, straightened in his seat, a rare fire flashing in his eyes. Camilla's lips parted, as though she meant to protest, but Anne silenced her with a raised hand, continuing her relentless exposé. Anne revealed that Camilla's machinations didn't stop at undermining William and Catherine. According to the documents she had gathered, Camilla's true ambition was far more audacious. She intended to carve a path for her own grandchildren, ensuring they rose above the traditional line of succession. What had started as whispers of influence had turned into a full-fledged scheme, threatening to upend the monarchy itself. The room fell into a stunned, suffocating silence. No one moved. Every pair of eyes darted between the two women at the center of this brewing storm, Anne, fierce and unyielding, and Camilla, caught for the first time in a trap she couldn't talk her way out of. But Anne wasn't finished. What she revealed next would dismantle every shred of trust left in the room. Princess Anne didn't just speak, she brought evidence. With trembling hands, she laid sealed letters on the table, each carrying the damning proof of Camilla's scheme. For a fleeting moment, the room froze in disbelief, as though time itself dared not move. The crisp sound of the envelopes hitting the polished wood echoed louder than any voice. Anne straightened her back and spoke with the cold precision of someone who had waited too long for this moment. She revealed the first letter, addressed to a senior royal advisor, in Camilla's unmistakable handwriting. In it, Camilla outlined her vision, a deliberate and calculated plan to sideline William entirely, to portray him as unfit for the crown, while quietly elevating her own grandson into direct succession. The words were merciless, written with chilling clarity. Gasps rippled across the table. Catherine pressed her hand to her mouth, her face paling as the realization sank in. William's jaw tightened, the faint flush of anger rising as his eyes bore into Camilla, who sat rigid, her knuckles white against the arm of her chair. Anne continued without flinching, sliding out the next letter, this one even more damning. It documented secret payments offered to palace aides in exchange for their silence, and, more disturbingly, their complicity. The amounts were staggering, with promises of offshore accounts and future favors for those who played their part. In another letter, threats appeared, thinly veiled but clear enough. There are ways to remove obstacles, one line read, penned in the same confident hand that now trembled ever so slightly in Camilla's lap. The words were underlined. William's fury was barely contained now, his clenched fist resting against the table as his glare stayed fixed on her. Charles sat motionless, his face pale as he reached instinctively for his chest, struggling to breathe evenly. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. The betrayal, written so plainly before him, seemed to drain the strength from his body. All around him, his family remained transfixed by the damning pages, each word cutting deeper than the last. Camilla finally broke her silence, her voice wavering as she attempted to dismiss the letters as forgeries. But even she knew her argument fell flat. The handwriting was unmistakable. The signatures at the bottom confirmed what no denial could erase. Her confidence cracked as she looked around the room, finding no ally in the stunned and furious faces staring back at her. But these were just words on paper. Anne's next revelation would shake the monarchy's very foundation. What Princess Anne revealed next pulled the curtain back on secret gatherings in obscure corners of the palace where power, ambition, and betrayal intertwined in the dead of night. Her voice lowered but sharpened, carrying an ominous weight, as she described how she herself had followed Camilla on 3 separate occasions. Not by accident, not by chance, but because something in Camilla's movements, her whispers to staff, her sudden disappearances, had betrayed her. Anne's words painted a chilling picture. Late at night, when even the guards on duty grew drowsy and the cameras were assumed to be dormant, Camilla would slip away, disappearing down narrow corridors, no longer mapped or remembered by most. Anne spoke of seeing Camilla enter locked rooms deep in the palace, a wing most thought abandoned, where she was met by powerful figures who should never have been there. There were influential financiers whose names had been quietly tied to scandals the palace had worked hard to bury, and former palace staff dismissed years ago under suspicion of disloyalty. These were not casual visits, Anne emphasized, but carefully choreographed meetings, sealed away from any official record, conducted in darkness with voices kept low and eyes always watching the door. The family sat in stunned silence as Anne described what she overheard during those nights. Plans to subtly, almost invisibly, adjust the line of succession were spoken of as though they were simply rearranging furniture. Advisors discussed how to manipulate public opinion, how to discredit William's ability to lead, how to plant stories to make Catherine seem unfit. Nothing was left to chance. Every step, every risk, weighed with cold calculation. But then came the detail that sent shivers through even the most hardened at the table. Witnesses loyal servants Anne had quietly persuaded to speak, reported seeing bags of cash exchanged after these meetings. Carried in by aides, taken out by men, Anne said, "You would never want to cross." Payments that could not be traced, passed in silence, then swallowed by the shadows. Anne's voice cracked just slightly when she admitted how sick she felt, watching it unfold. She had stood in the dark herself, clutching the folder that now sat before them, wondering if she would ever have the strength to tell what she had seen. But now, with everyone's eyes fixed on her and Camilla visibly crumbling, she delivered it with grim certainty. Yet even with evidence mounting, the most personal blow had yet to come, a revelation so intimate it left the family breathless. Just when the royal family thought they had heard it all, Princess Anne produced something no one expected. Letters written by Diana herself, hidden away by Camilla all these years. The moment Anne's hand brushed over a final envelope from the folder, the room shifted. A tension sharper than before settled over the table as she spoke in a voice that trembled not with weakness, but with restrained fury. "These," she said, "were not letters drafted in palace offices or dictated under watchful eyes. These were personal, handwritten words from Diana, words Anne had discovered, tucked away in Camilla's private study, concealed between false drawers and locked boxes." The silence in the room deepened as Anne explained how she had come across them, by accident at first, but then driven by a suspicion she could no longer ignore. The letters dated back to the final years of Diana's life, some of them written in hurried script, others almost painfully composed. In them, Diana confessed fears she had kept secret even from those closest to her fears, that Camilla was far from finished, that her ambitions went beyond Charles, and that, in time, she would find a way to undermine Diana's children. Anne's words landed like blows. The first letter she read aloud described Diana's growing certainty that her sons were in danger not from enemies outside the palace walls, but from within. "Mark my words," the letter said. "She will not stop until she has what she believes is hers, and it will cost William and Harry everything if no one sees it." At that, William could no longer hold himself together. He dropped his gaze, his shoulders trembling, and when he finally spoke, his voice cracked under the weight of it all. "She knew." The words barely rose above a whisper, yet they cut through the silence like a scream. Catherine reached for his hand, but her own was shaking. Across the table, Camilla's composure faltered. Her cheeks flushed with anger and disbelief, as she vehemently denied ever having seen the letters. She claimed they must have been planted to frame her, insisting she would never have kept them, let alone hidden them. But Anne's response was to unfold the next sheet and begin reading aloud again. Diana's unmistakable handwriting, staring back at everyone, her unique turns of phrase, her unmistakable signature, marking every page. Around the table, the family's reactions turned chaotic. Charles, his hands trembling visibly now, leaned back in his chair as if the air itself had betrayed him. Catherine's eyes brimmed with tears she no longer tried to hide, while Harry stared unblinking, his expression somewhere between horror and bitter recognition. The room became a maelstrom of gasps, suppressed sobs, and barely contained fury, each word Anne read aloud cracking the family's fragile facade a little more. And yet, the most shocking revelation still lay ahead of Anne's final evidence that would leave Camilla with nowhere to run. Anne turned the meeting into a courtroom, laying down a trail of transactions that revealed how far Camilla had gone to buy influence and power. The quiet shuffle of papers gave way to a thunderous silence, as Anne unfolded another set of documents, this time with a deliberate finality that no one dared interrupt. What she revealed next peeled back the last of the illusions surrounding Camilla's schemes. A secret trust fund, hidden for years under layers of shell companies and pseudonyms, sat quietly in Camilla's name, its balance stretching into the millions. Anne's voice stayed steady as she listed the dates of deposits, each one matched to critical moments of political maneuvering within the family. The source of the money was even more disturbing. Anne revealed that the trust had been fed by anonymous donors with ties to controversial figures, long kept at the palace's margins, people with histories of corruption and scandal, who suddenly found favor under Camilla's influence. Gasps rose around the table as Anne connected those faceless names to events everyone in the room now saw in a grim new light. But she didn't stop there. Anne's next blow landed hard. The money had not just padded Camilla's accounts but was traced directly to royal aides who, until this very moment, sat comfortably in their roles as trusted confidants. Payments had been funneled to their families, mortgages paid off overnight, unexplained bonuses delivered quietly, all in exchange for their silence and complicity. The tension climbed higher still when Anne produced bank statements that traced significant sums being funneled to the guardians of Camilla's grandson. Every deposit timed perfectly with the progress of her secret plan to elevate him toward the throne. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth again as William leaned forward, his glare fixed entirely on Camilla. And then came the final sting. A set of offshore accounts Anne slammed onto the table, their existence undeniable. The proof, stamped and authenticated, laid bare a web of deceit that now stretched far beyond anything the family had imagined. Even the aides standing along the walls of the room shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet Anne's gaze. Charles sat as if turned to stone, his breath shallow, his complexion ghostly, teetering on the brink of collapse. William's fury by now was unmistakable. His eyes narrowed, sharp as daggers, locked entirely on Camilla, who no longer even pretended to defend herself. But Anne's most ruthless move was still to come. An ultimatum no one saw coming. With the entire family now staring at Camilla in stunned silence, Anne delivered her final, merciless blow. "Leave quietly, or I take this to the public." The words landed like a hammer, shattering what little composure remained in the room. Anne's voice, steady yet laced with rage, carried an authority that left no room for negotiation. For the first time, Camilla's power, meticulously constructed, ruthlessly guarded, began to crumble right in front of them all. Anne leaned forward, her gaze fixed, and declared that she would not, under any circumstances, allow Camilla to remain in power. The evidence was overwhelming, the betrayal irredeemable, and Anne would see to it that justice was done, even if it meant dragging the entire scandal into the unforgiving light of day. Anne made her threat crystal clear. If Camilla did not step down from her position within 24 hours, she would release everything. The letters, the financial records, and the testimony of the staff to the press. And Anne didn't just say it, she promised it, her words ringing with the weight of finality. The silence was deafening. Even the bravest of them struggled to look up, as though bracing for what was about to unfold. To her left, Catherine straightened her shoulders, her chin lifting in solidarity. William's head dipped in a single, deliberate nod, his jaw rigid but his eyes fierce, affirming Anne's ultimatum. Across the table, Harry's face reflected something more complicated. A storm of emotions that kept him rooted to his chair, his hands clenched into fists, but never rising in Camilla's defense. And then there was Charles. He sat like a man hollowed out, frozen by what he could no longer deny. The king's eyes darted between his sister and his wife, yet no words came. Not even a whisper of protest escaped his lips. In that moment, his silence spoke louder than anything he could have said, an admission of defeat, a surrender to the unstoppable force Anne had become. But it was Camilla's reaction that cut deepest. For the first time, she seemed to shatter completely. Tears welled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks as she broke into sobs, pleading with Anne, pleading with all of them, to show mercy. She claimed she hadn't meant for it to go this far, that she had acted out of fear, out of desperation. But Anne didn't flinch. Her resolve never wavered. The air grew so thick with tension, it became hard to breathe. And as Anne gathered her folder and began to turn away, believing the matter finally decided, Camilla muttered something under her breath, sparking one final confrontation that left the room reeling. With tears streaming down her face, Camilla stood, her voice shaking yet defiant, and revealed something so shocking it left even Anne speechless. The silence that followed Anne's ultimatum seemed unbreakable until Camilla broke it herself. Slowly rising, her hands trembling but her eyes blazing with a strange kind of pride, she looked directly at Anne and spoke. What she said turned the room on its head. Through sobs that could not quite mask her conviction, Camilla declared that she had never plotted for power out of greed. No, she claimed every move she made had been to protect the monarchy from itself. Her voice rose, stronger now, though still quivering with fury and desperation. She accused William and Catherine of being dangerously naive, of falling prey to manipulations from outsiders who sought to erode the family's influence and fracture its foundations. She said she'd seen it happening long before anyone else would admit it, and she had decided to act, quietly and decisively, before it was too late. According to her, placing her own bloodline into the line of succession was not a betrayal but a safeguard, a way to keep the crown secure in hands she could trust, free from what she called the poison waiting outside these walls. Every bribe, every secret meeting, Every hidden account, she justified them all as necessary sacrifices to shield the monarchy from ruin. She denied harboring malice toward anyone in the room. "You think I did this to hurt you?" she cried. "You think I wanted to see you suffer? I've only ever tried to protect what you're too blind to see is slipping away." To her, she was not the villain, but the family's protector, the only one willing to get her hands dirty when everyone else pretends nothing was wrong. For the first time, Anne faltered. She scoffed at Camilla's words, but could not hide the slight hesitation in her eyes, the smallest crack in her armor. As much as she despised the betrayal, something in Camilla's raw confession struck a chord she couldn't fully suppress. Around them, the family dissolved into chaos. Some members began to murmur, their loyalty wavering between Anne's relentless pursuit of justice and Camilla's impassioned plea. Harry lowered his gaze, seemingly torn, while Charles slumped deeper into his chair, caught between shock and something closer to resignation. And as the dust settled, Princess Anne turned to her brother, delivering one last chilling line that sealed Camilla's fate and the monarchy's next chapter. In the quiet that followed, the royal family was left to reckon with the damage not just to their public image, but to their very foundation. And Anne's final words still hung in the air. Never again. One by one, the family dispersed from the table, no longer able to bear the weight of each other's eyes. No words were exchanged as they rose, each retreating into the corridors as though fleeing from the ghosts now haunting the room. Even the sound of footsteps seemed too loud, too intrusive, for what had just unfolded. Charles was the first to disappear entirely, his shoulders heavy, his face drawn and ashen. Without a glance at anyone, he vanished down the hall and shut himself into his private quarters, refusing to speak further, his silence a testament to how thoroughly the night had broken him. Not even his most loyal aides dared to follow. Camilla stood motionless for a long time before she too gathered herself. She offered no final plea, no parting words, and no defense. Her head bowed, her eyes fixed firmly on the floor, she quietly exited the palace. What awaited her beyond those gates, no one dared imagine her future now as uncertain as the monarchy she had once tried to reshape. William and Catherine lingered together just a moment longer, their hands finding each other instinctively. They did not speak, but their closeness said enough. Shaken but united, they turned and walked away, their figures moving in step. A silent vow passing between them to protect what remained of their family from ever descending into such chaos again. Yet Anne stayed behind. Long after the others had gone, she remained, her eyes fixed on the empty table where secrets had been torn open and trust destroyed. The folder still lay before her, unopened now but no less powerful. Her resolve was unbroken, her expression carved from the same quiet steel that had carried her through the confrontation. She knew the path forward would not be easy, but she had made her choice, and she had rewritten the rules of the monarchy forever. As the palace gates closed behind them that night, the world outside remained blissfully unaware of the storm that had passed, but for those inside, nothing would ever be the same again. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.